The Sound of Money with Santosh Sirur.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another super special episode of my podcast, Sound of Money. Today on my podcast, I'm delighted to have Professor Krishnamurthy V Subramanian and his wife Kavita, who are joining me from Washington, D.C. Professor Subramanian served as the 17th Chief Economic Advisor to the Government of India, and yes, he's the youngest to hold this prestigious position. He is now India's Executive Director at the International Monetary Fund, where he continues to represent India on global economic matters. His wife Kavita is a senior consultant at the World Bank and an executive coach, an MBA from the University of Chicago Booth School of Business, and an engineer from National Institute of Technology, Karnataka. She ran all the MBA programs at the Indian School of Business. Pleasure to have this power couple, yet a very humble couple, joining me on my podcast, The Sound of Money. Hi, Kavita and Professor Subramanian. Good to have you on The Sound of Money.
Thank you so much, Mr. Santosh. Love being here.
Thanks so much, Santosh. It's a pleasure to be chatting with you.
Most welcome, sir. Professor, I think the first question is for you. As the youngest CEA, the Honorable Prime Minister actually applauded you for being your brilliance on economic and policy matters. And also, more importantly, the zeal in you, the zest in you, because that's the young India, which you are all talking about. And he had a person, right, advising him, right? What were the initial thoughts when you got to know that you are the CEA? And it's a different story that you're the youngest one, but when you actually get to know, and I'll tell you where I'm coming from. Within my own circles, the banking circles, to be very honest with you, we talk a lot about you. Why? You too started a career in a bank, just like me in ICICI Bank, and a lot of my colleagues with ICICI Bank. Then you moved up the chain as EA to FIMDA chairman. I believe Dr. Nachiket more, it may be around the same time. Then on to to your professor.
Yes.
I guess right, because 2001 I joined in 1999, same year more or less when you would have joined. So we know Dr. Nachiket Moore was there, and then he moved on to FIMDA. So,
Indeed.
right. So, we see you there just like one of us. Then, because for a lot of Indians today, being there at that level of in the government is different, because you've worked in a bank, you continue your careers in bank. Then you moved on to Bandhan, of course, as on the board. As a professor, you had a very different stint because you saw economy or finance from very different lens. Then came the CEA, which was a totally different view, an overview. It's like a view from the Mars or the space. And now you get the India view from an IMF standpoint. So my question to you is coming back. What were the thoughts when you got to know that you are going to be the CEA?
First of all, it's very gratifying, Santosh, for you to remind that role as the executive assistant to the FIMDA chairman. Indeed, actually, Dr. Nachiket Moore was very, he's been a mentor, he's been a very good mentor, and he gave me that opportunity. So, when I look back, Santosh, I just find myself to be a commoner who's just been privileged to get uncommon opportunities. I think you very rightly mentioned, I am just one among, all of you, and especially those of us who worked in a bank. It's been it's been a surreal experience, I must say. I still remember the day when the phone call came from, the principal secretary to the Honorable Prime Minister. If I remember right, it was the 8th of December of 2018. And there's one incident that sort of highlights the excitement, not just in us, but in our entire family. My younger brother, who's 2 years younger to me, he's also, worked in a bank. He used to work with JP Morgan Chase, is now a professor at the Indian School of Business. He was there teaching in the Hyderabad campus, and he was with us. So he had gone to have a bath, and he had applied soap on him. I think he was able to make out from the conversation that the call was from the Prime Minister's office. So he comes halfway through his bath wearing a towel, all soaked up. And he's just excited to know so he just does this or this, because I'm still in the conversation and I just did this.
Wow.
And, all soaked up, he hugs me. And so, look, for us, we come from a very, humble background, low middle class background. My father, worked very hard to educate the two of us. He never went to university himself, and so in some sense, the dreams that he had to be educated, actually, he, fulfilled it for us.
Yeah.
So for us, our family itself, I think it was a very big thing to get that opportunity. And in terms of the experience that you asked, I can look back and say, working with the Honorable Prime Minister, I think for me, has been an incredible privilege. Having gotten the opportunity to interact with him very closely and many times one-on-one, I have been incredibly inspired by his leadership. There are many occasions, and I'm being honest, I can share, where I would walk out after a meeting with him, and then I would think, oh, I need to work even harder, because the opportunity to contribute. And not that I was not working very hard, I was working incredibly hard, but it's just the inspiration that he would provide would make me think as I walked out of the room that I need to work harder. So it's been an incredible privilege. He's by far the best learner that I've encountered, and I say this with some, a breadth of experience on this, because I've been taught by Nobel laureates. I've actually had the opportunity to work with many sort of corporate CEOs and governors, etc. So in that context, having seen a wide array of very very accomplished people, I still felt incredibly inspired. I think that just reflects how how wonderful it was to work with him. Yeah, I think I don't think he ever actually sort of took into account age, etc. What he cared for is basically the ideas that one brought. And I think I found him incredibly supportive. Yeah, it's just I just feel incredibly privileged. As I said, a commoner who just had uncommon opportunities.
Absolutely wonderful. And just like any other banker would have that firefighting day in, day out, right? You know how banking world is. You had probably the once in a lifetime COVID as the firefighting zone. And I'm sure none of us were prepared for that. And this probably came as like just out of the blues and really bolt from the blues.
Yeah.
How was that experience? Because none of us were prepared for it. And for you, it was an advisor to the Prime Minister. It could have been unthinkable. What next, right? And it was a what next for the entire world. How did you face that challenge?
Correct. Yeah, that's a very good question. In fact, the 3 years when I was there, actually, I had the opportunity to deal with many challenges. If you would recall, growth started declining. Around my first press conference as the CEA, when GDP numbers came, if I remember, it was 5.3%, and then it declined, all because of some of the financial sector problems. I wrote about it, analyzed it, and at that time, there were a few people who were saying that India is hitting its middle income trap already. I didn't believe that, in sort of suggesting that there's something structurally wrong with the Indian economy, which I believe was certainly not the case. So to be able to actually put out your own what I genuinely believed in, even though it was against the tide of of expert opinion, and then to to basically be in the hot seat, if you will, during COVID, I think was a very, very good, phenomenal learning experience, and also an experience to actually be able to contribute. I think I'll be honest, actually, there were times when I used to wonder, why is it that, this much amount of difficulties one had to encounter. But I think, and I also will mention, there were times when I would, especially during COVID, I would get up at 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the night, sort of with some concerns, and then I would just go and read. There was a period where I was sort of still trying to, figure out what is this crisis really about. And then I used to read a lot. So, I think it was an opportunity, once in a century crisis, right?
Yeah.
And therefore, the entire system also was very receptive, for ideas at that point in time. So, and I will mention, actually, advice is only necessary. It's leadership that makes it sufficient to be able to, bring about the good outcomes. And there again, I have absolutely no hesitation in giving the lion's share of credit to the Honorable Prime Minister, because, advice can always be, and has been the case in previous, when I think previous advisors, etc., many times their advice has not been incorporated as much. I was lucky enough that we had a leader who was actually willing to take, unconventional cause, who was willing to, to basically, who had the courage of conviction to not necessarily just go, implement, copy paste what other nations were doing. And I think whether it was discovering our own vaccine, coming up with our own vaccine, or fiscal policy that was very different from the advanced economies. In all these instances, I think I feel that the Honorable Prime Minister displayed incredible leadership, and therefore the lion's share of credit has to go to him for how the economy has emerged out of COVID.
Yeah, that's it's really interesting to know. Professor, you mentioned earlier about your humble beginnings, the family of family values, and I think the role of your Appa, and I've read a lot about you mentioning that on LinkedIn and other posts, where your Appa, your mom, both of them played a very, very crucial role as an inspirational role in life, right? Be it simple as school fees to educating you guys, within that family. I believe you were the first, to be English educated, convent educated. And I kind of remember you also mentioning that what always was taught is working hard and doing what is right is important than doing what is popular. Yeah. Maybe if you could share a little, the reason I again ask you this question is today's generation, right? It's a very different generation. It's the Insta generation, the Insta results generation. They need to know, because hard work, perseverance, and I believe, the hard work of your parents makes a huge difference on the kids. If you could share your own thoughts.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right that in some sense kids, sort of learn from what the parents do rather than what the parents talk. And like any other lower middle class family, and there are many stories like this in India. I came from as I said, come from a lower middle class family. My mom many times used to work hard without a maid. So we didn't have we were just the two brothers, and so I oftentimes would help her with a lot of household chores. And similarly, my father as well, many occasions, for instance, till I was I think I was in primary school, I remember he had only one pant, one shirt, because not only was he supporting our family, but he was supporting two other sisters, elder sisters, they had gotten widowed, and he was supporting them, and an elder brother as well. So even though he was the youngest, he was supporting. And so you can imagine, actually, on a sort of a clerical salary, it wasn't easy. There were occasions where, if it rained badly, and my mom would basically wash that one pant, one shirt, it wouldn't dry in the morning. And so I would iron it, to make it dry so that he could go wear it for office. So I think a lot of those instances, those leave a lasting impression on you. I think also my father actually used to share his own personal experiences very, very, very liberally. He would talk about how he faced various challenges. If ever I felt, for instance, I couldn't do something, right? I felt maybe a little less confident. He would say, no, you can do it. I with much less means, actually, I've done it, so I'm sure you can do it as well. I remember this specific instance, when I was, so as I said, because we come from a sort of a low middle class family, I never watched English movies or listened to English movies, English, music, or even read that many English books either. When I was I would read only the textbooks for school. As a result, I didn't have that good reading speed when I was taking CAT. So I remember mentioning it to I think one of my sort of low moments, mentioning it to my father that, I don't think I can get into IIMs. I don't think I can clear CAT. And then he asks me why. I says, mostly these are all kids coming from well-to-do families, and, they've had different exposure, and so my father says, what are these kids, do they have two horns to them? They're also like you, so if they had exposure earlier, you can get exposure now. You're earning now. Go and watch whatever movies you want to watch. Go and listen to whatever music you want to listen. Go and read whatever books you need to read. If they might have done over 8-10 years, you do it over 8-10 months, and catch up. I think that kind of basically, so the emphasis was on hard work. And I think then later, when I actually, became a professor and I was here in the US, he would keep telling me about the need for actually serving the nation. He said, even if you're not doing nothing, just the fact that your tax money is basically going to serve the people of India rather than people of another country itself is service. And so he would emphasize the need for, for me to be in India. For instance, when I'd moved to the Indian School of Business, I was getting offers from other countries to move. But he said, no, be in India, actually, whatever, serve. I think those kind of values actually, and my father is not there anymore, but those words of his will always resonate with me. And, I cannot therefore think about moving to another country. I think these values and the values that he himself used to live and my mom used to live, parents, I think that's what kids, as I said, imbibe the values that their parents, live really.
Absolutely, absolutely. Since you mentioned, we are all coming from the banking finance community, and not just banking and finance. Today's world, it's so stressed out. Commuting is so much of takes time, especially in cities like in some parts of India, right? There's a lot of self-doubt, a lot of lack of confidence among people, even at the topmost leadership sometimes, where they wonder, are we doing the right thing? Are we on the right track? The COVID probably has taught you those learnings, any instances apart from that, you thought, and how did you overcome them? What's very important for you apart from the academic knowledge and the experience?
So I think, Santosh, I have no hesitation in saying that every person, however successful he or she, is, goes through periods of self-doubt sometime or the other. If that person claims that he or she has never encountered a phase of self-doubt, I think that is something that is, I guess, not quite right. It's not a reflection of the reality. So I think in times like that, I've gone through, for a period, it was very difficult getting publications, academic publication, acceptance rates are 3.5%. Top journals, I'm talking about the ones that I basically, needed to target being at the Indian School of Business. So for a period, actually, I went through, and one thing that happens is when you're not having a very good time, the outside world, others basically, judge you in a very not very flattering manner. That happens with everyone. I think it is important at that point to actually have your own anchor of basically saying that, I am not as bad as the outside world is making me seem or making me look or making me feel. I think it is important to have that anchor. Equally, I have now actually, the last several years, I also keep reminding myself, nor am I possibly as good as the world is now making me seem after some of these, successes. And I think that internal compass, in some sense, I think what I emphasize is the need for the internal compass, not live world, through the external world's eyes. Basically, it's as if, what the external world says, basically keep reflecting, oh, that is who you are. Then you will be sort of exposed to the vicissitudes of public opinion. I think having that internal compass actually makes a big difference. And I think this also faith, when you're giving it your all, actually 100% effort with 200% good intent, then after that, you can actually in the night when you put your head to the pillow, you can say, I gave it my best. If that was not good enough, it was not good enough. I leave it to some higher powers to basically for the outcome. In some sense, that is the essence of the Bhagavad Gita as well. I think many of these, learnings from spirituality also, I think really helped in not getting too stressed. I think bottom line, people get stressed when they feel too much ownership or they try to control the uncontrollable things. There are a lot of things, what other people perceive of you, the outcome of some effort that you put in, these are all uncontrollable. When people try to control the uncontrollable, that's when the stress builds up. Recognizing that, I will just control what I can control, which is my effort, the way I perceive myself, I think is the key to not getting stressed.
Absolutely. I completely agree with you. My next question is, I will not say better, but the best half who has been having, unstinting support for you. And I'm sure in times of, all through the life, your career, right? And as you grow, I'm sure the challenges and the kind of work stress is a lot more. And that's where, Kavita ma'am, you have been, I'm sure, great support to Professor. You've been very instrumental in the education space. Conceptualizing new programs, career counseling, and even advice, right? Whilst there has been an impetus on L&D, learning and development, what, according to you, are the key challenges that you foresee in interacting with today's students? Because today's students are, whilst they are on the laptops and studying, they're also twiddling on their phones, and they have so much of access to information. Even before you teach them something, they can, use the AI and come up with an answer themselves. So where do you see and my questions are from two angles. One is the US angle, where you have come across students now as a part of your career. whilst also from India's standpoint, the aspirational Indian student today, and as a part of your career in India, in the education space, if you could share your thoughts.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you so much, Santosh, and thanks for having me in your episode. And yes, you're right. I've worked a lot. Predominantly, my career has been in the learning and development, especially higher education space. More than 20 years, around 20 years, both in US as well as in India. Predominantly in India, but I've also worked in US as well.
Yeah.
I think, yes, there are a lot of changes. There are a lot of abilities that have been provided to the students currently, but there also, it comes with challenges.
Yeah.
Some could be geographically, like it is only pertains to India, may not be to US and vice versa. And
Yeah.
some pertain to students across the world. I think you mentioned that as well. So I think, yes, attention and grabbing the attention of students from their laptop as well as their mobile, etc., are challenges that are across any demographic, across any geographic location.
Agreed.
I think that's a challenge. And hence, I think the teaching or the learning that we are providing to the students needs to be adapted. I think we have to accept that that's part of life, and it does come with a lot of advantages. But at the same time, it also reduces a person's ability to focus and, grasp attention. So one of the main things I would say is that learning needs to be focused on action learning or experiential learning, as some people put it, because that is one thing that differentiates from whatever you can get out of a laptop, right? I mean, there are many open sources. You can learn about pretty much everything in the world. If you just open up a laptop and you have internet connection, I think you can.
Yeah.
But what really makes a difference in a university setting or anywhere where you're learning is how you see it practically being used. And for that, I think action learning or experiential learning makes the biggest impact there, because you can learn, and this can be also the impact of having hybrid education. I think is good in a good for wherever people can afford it and wherever it can be provided to people. It's really wonderful because it gives you the unique ability of learning the concepts, maybe through a laptop, through pre-designed sessions or modules, but then focus on what did you learn, how can you implement. So more on the practical learning can be done more in the face-to-face or interactions as well. So those are certain things. And I think if I look specifically at in India, one of the things that we do see is that there is a slight skill gap that is missing, is mainly on the soft skill gap. A lot of our students are technically very adept, and that's what the focus is on technical education. However, many of our programs and several other programs maybe not be focusing, and as a society in general, probably we have not emphasized on the soft skills, and given the adaptability that's needed in the current fast-paced world, I think that gap would really help them become leaders, think more strategically, and not only think. I think thinking is, at least you are able to learn it through your programs, but how do you articulate it? How do you make sure the other person understands what you're trying to say? I think those are that I would say. The second thing, I think the focus should be on building an innovation and entrepreneurial mindset. Now, I could say that more for India, but I think it can be applicable everywhere as well. Because in a fast-pacing world right now, I think the traditional roles, traditional careers may go through a change. That's what we keep hearing. And it's probably true as we go through it, and we see some of it happening as well. And in India, especially more, I think, as the economy is broadening and there needs to be more jobs created, more people need to be actively involved in the economy. I think innovation and entrepreneurship is what is going to give the second, leg up. And for that, we need to start preparing our students. So building an innovative mindset, ability to take calculated risks, ability to be able to because taking risk is one of the reasons why people don't, many people have ideas, and that's what I keep hearing even in my roles previously. I mean, everybody has an idea to do it, but to jump, take that jump, it's tough, it's very hard. And for that, the mindset is what provides you. So I think those are areas that would really help. It wouldn't come in a day's time. It comes with practice, but building it initially does help a lot.
Absolutely.
Those would be my thoughts on the education space.
Absolutely. So just like Professor faced the challenge, the daunting challenge of managing the economy in a way during COVID, you too faced the challenge of how to manage the education space, and you came up with some different thought process in terms of induced learning when it came to COVID. And as we see today, not just the education, but most of the space that we see, we have adapted to the hybrid systems. But of course, in the initial days, it must have been a terrible challenge, right? Not even forget, even getting onto the laptop, the availability of a laptop or a computer for, imagine, a family of 4 with 2 kids having to log into school. It was challenging. How did you guys come up with the COVID-induced learning mechanism?
I think you're right, spot on that. It was a very challenging time, but at the same time, if I reflect back, I think for me that was the phase of highest learning in some way. How do you adapt to this change, right? I mean, it's a shock that is induced, and like every other industry and space, education sector was impacted as well. And education prior to that used to be predominantly face-to-face. There was only, everybody came to the, I was working in Indian School of Business, and our education also predominantly, there were a few programs which had hybrid, but we were predominantly face-to-face only, where students come to the classroom, they see the professor, and there's a face-to-face learning. So it needed a lot of change, starting from, of course, technological changes. Yes, platform change, identifying the right platform, working with the vendor to ensure it is swiftly put up. That's definitely there, but it needed beyond that. I mean, that is something that happened, and it was important and very critical, no doubt about it. But what was also equally important is training the educators, training the students, training the staff members who are helping everybody to be not only adept at the technology, but also the mindset, right? Because you had to do a lot of things differently. I mean, the teaching itself, as you may be aware, has to change, because the professors can no longer teach. Yeah, exactly. Can no longer teach what they would teach the same concepts, but they have to adapt it to a digital world, which required a lot of mindset change as well. So I think critical things that I learned or I saw at that time was, since you did ask how did we manage it, I think having adaptability and flexibility, flexible mindset really is needed whenever there's a shock, because if you have to move from what you always knew traditionally, it needs you to be expanding your horizon, thinking differently, thinking from the angle of, so we had to, like, so who was also saying earlier, you never knew, and you mentioned it, you never knew how long this is going to persist. Yes, there was lockdown, but you don't know how long is the lockdown. And so that makes it, or when are things going to go back to normal ever? I mean, people did have these thoughts, and we are back to normal. So now it seems too far, but at that time, you didn't know whether it's a few months, is it a few years, and is the world going to look different, right, after we come out of it? So these were thoughts that went through. So there's a lot of thinking, a lot of meetings, a lot of strategic thoughts about it. I think what really helped us in some ways, of course, is communication. I think the constant communication with all the stakeholders was essential to ensure that all their needs are being accommodated, right? I mean, you can always come up with a plan that works for you, but then you have to make sure it works for everybody else. And for me, actually, Santosh, we had almost, for my portfolio at least, I had few programs, but programs were at different stages in the program, right? I mean, so effectively, I had in some way 11 programs that needed to be adapted to this form of learning. So you have to take into account, and each student or each learner is in a different space, and it was also important this part of doing an ISB program is one part of their life. They have a whole other part of life that's also undergoing a lot of changes. So we have to adapt to all that to help them feel comfortable, help them feel like their needs are. I think that was critical. And so we had a lot of meetings, very late night meetings, whatever worked for people, and very long meetings to hear people out fully. And I think that really enabled us to come up with a plan that worked for almost everybody. And that's one of the ways that it happened. And the second thing I would say is change management. I think any of these are change managements in some ways. So managing the whole body to change effectively and go in sync with each other, that was essential. essential, because while we may be doing the delivery as my team, there are lots of other teams with support, right? So everybody has to
Whole
undergo the same
infrastructure and
thing.
ecosystem
Whether
has
it's a
to work
technical
in
team,
sync.
operations team. Yeah,
Absolutely.
every unit has to move in sync in
Yeah.
some way. So effective change management, I think these were things that came out of it. I would say adaptability, constant communication, and effective change management. Now, did it happen overnight? Of course not. I mean, there were lots of, steps, missteps, and
Yeah.
but effectively, I think I'm glad to see that we were able to surmount those challenges and come out of it very well. And I think some of those learnings will be continuously used by every industry, including education industry. I think as we go into the normal pace of life as well, I mean, it has provided us a lot of learnings that we can take with us.
Absolutely. Kavita,
So
many,
I
many
can
congrats.
add,
Yeah,
Santosh.
please. Yeah. Yes, please.
So, because I was also, I continue to be a professor at ISB, and here, I don't speak as Kavita's husband. I actually speak as one of the faculty that she used to actually engage with as well. While I was not teaching, I had other colleagues. One of the things that I think, especially these kind of very uncertain periods, right? The leader needs to make everybody comfortable. And I think that is something which Kavita, did really well generally. And I think that those are aspects also quite important to keep in mind.
Absolutely. And imagine your life as a student, you've stepped into ISB, and then you come across COVID, and then you say, oh my God, I probably resigned from an organization and got admissions into ISB, or I'm a fresh out of college and got admissions into ISB, and here comes COVID, and I don't even know the time horizon, right? And that's where leadership of the faculty and you guys really makes that difference, right? In fact, these same students will have an additional asterisk out there saying that, hey, I was there during COVID and I'm still so much out there.
Yes.
Exactly.
Definitely. In fact, as you mentioned it comes to my mind, our daughter, our firstborn daughter, was in US and she was doing her first year of undergrad education. So I can relate to what you were saying. That's always going to remain in their mind, as to how they came, the impact of it, both positive and negative in whatever way, but it's going to remain in their minds.
Absolutely. Kavita, many, many congratulations on your recent executive coach certifications. Congratulations. How do you actually intend to, help in driving their careers ahead of these students? And, more importantly, navigate the leadership challenges seamlessly. How do you plan to execute what you've, learned as a part of this certification? I'm sure it's a different ball game altogether.
Yeah. No, I agree. Thank you so much, Santosh, for congratulating me on the certification. Executive coaching, as I think, as we know, is mainly to enable, leaders or senior executives to achieve their fulfillment, right? Each person's purpose or fulfillment, whatever we call that, could be different. And the executive coaches are enablers in some way to help the person reach where it is. And it's not just senior leaders, executives, professionals at different stages in their careers. So where I have had, of course, 20 plus years of working in learning and development space. And initially I started out at Emory's Gosweda School of Business. I was a career coach in some, if I say so, for all the students, bunch of students who were assigned to me fully. And that's where I think my coaching journey in some way began, or my interest in coaching, you can say, began. And then thereafter, I continued it in a very, you can call it informal way, because I had this wonderful opportunity to interact with professionals throughout my career at Indian School of Business. So a lot of our conversations with some of those folks ended up being along, where is your career? What are the challenges you're facing? And so informally I've been with this, and it was always my intention to, get into this space a little more formally, get trained more formally. So hence I chose to get this certification, which is International Coaching Federation enabled. So that provides a little more, context, and you realize, and also credibility in terms of what you are offering. So what I would like to say is I would like to offer a holistic approach to the senior leaders and executives who are looking to partner in terms of coaching. Because coaching in some way, or anybody's fulfillment, for anybody to feel fulfilled, I think the journey begins within. For everybody, the journey begins within, because you have to know yourself really well for you to achieve your full potential. I think that's, in a way, I would say, is is the crux of what we learn in a lot of our modules, etc., is to help people navigate that. And once you know yourself really well, I think you can draw a bigger vision for you. You realize how you can reach those various stages and where you want to see yourself, and also bridge any gap, right? I mean, if there are some gaps, you want to bridge them. Those are ways that you could do. I also would like to say that the coaching approach, my approach is more strength-based, in the sense everybody comes with a strength or multiple strengths of theirs. And I think playing to the strengths and enabling the strengths more while being aware of where you need to improve. Of course, you shouldn't be ignoring it completely, but I think playing to your strengths and using your strengths really help people, pursue their path further and go where they want or where they desire to be. So the way I see is the coach, or if I'm the coach for a person, I'm an enabler, helping a person realize what's within them, help them communicate that to whoever they need to speak that about, help them make a plan to go further on that, as well as reflect on, what's happened in my life. Have I done the right steps? What I think should be right for my career, and should I be taking a U-turn maybe for some people, or should I be going ahead? Whatever they are and wherever they are is what I think a coach enables, and that's where I would say that I want to contribute and be part of, because that's something really, as I speak about it, I can say that it really excites me. It really excites me to be part of a person's learning and, a journey. And of course, whenever a person has reached, whatever their small stage, it could be first stage or second stage, it gives a big fulfillment for me as a coach as well, that I played a very small part in it, but I have played a part in it to help them achieve. So I think that's where I'm going, and that's what I'm looking for. A more holistic approach, because many of the sessions, even in ours, we would start with, bringing a person to, people have a lot of busy life, right? You come do your office, you're, like you mentioned, traffic, you've just driven and you come back. So you just help the person settle in first, right? And then move to the what we want to discuss. And it's also, when I say all these things, I also want to mention it's also very practical, as well as there are goals that will be set. And so that's how the executive coach approach, my approach at least, is that there are tangible results. I mean, it's not just because sometimes people worry that they sit and speak and then what happens after that. So there are tangible results, there are tangible goals to be, and at each session you previously review, what's happened and what's going on. So it's a holistic approach with tangible results is what I would say.
Absolutely. I really like the fact that when you mentioned that it's all about self-introspection, and you are a part of that enabling thing, so that, I think that's very, very, very crucial. Professor, I wanted to know from you, because you've been mentioning a lot about this in your post, and that's where it's very interesting, right? Whilst you are, looking at economy, finance, business, governance, you also talk about spirituality. I think that's a fantastic combination, because people always think they're so muddled in life, so busy life. But here is a person who is equally or more than busy, more busier than us, but gives time to spirituality, which I think is very important, because I'm sure you are able to manage the stress, the stress buildup, or whatever happens on your day-to-day life in your office, etc. What's that one key to keep one going? Maybe what's been that learning?
I think I want to pick up from what Kavita mentioned, right? She was talking about how if you want to achieve something in life, you need to understand yourself, right? I think that's a mantra that actually it's a very powerful mantra. And I think what I believe is spirituality actually that really enables, it is really the process of trying to understand yourself. And so many people sort of implicitly think that that sort of your normal day-to-day work or profession, a career, family, etc., and spirituality are sort of maybe, giving time to spirituality somehow subtracts time from, let's say, from other normal activities. But as Kavita very rightly explained, if you actually have clarity, right, and you can prioritize very well, then you can spend that time on your day-to-day, whether it's your career, whether it's your family, etc., you can spend it much more efficiently. And I think spirituality really enables that process of understanding yourself, thereby setting basically, what is the goal that you have for yourself, thereby then basically also, deciding what are the priorities on career, on your family, etc., and being able to balance, in some sense. See, I'd like to give this metaphor that, all of us are sort of juggling with many different balls, right? Now, in the prioritization, the way I would like to say is there are some, there are some glass balls that we are juggling with. There are many rubber balls. You can let the rubber ball. Sometimes while juggling, if you take your eye off the ball, right, the ball will fall.
Absolutely.
So you don't want to take eyes off the glass balls, because once you take that eye, it falls down to the ground and breaks into pieces. And metaphorically and literally, you'll be collecting the pieces in the rest of your life, right? So I think in some sense, when you understand yourself, you also understand your priorities, and thereby you are able to actually tailor your own decisions, actions, etc., to actually fulfill your priorities. So I think the something very profound that Kavita mentioned is all of progress actually is about understanding yourself really well. And I think spirituality really enables that. It also gives you I think important perspective, something that I was mentioning earlier about what is it that you can control and what is it that you cannot control, and thereby gives you that very clean, sort of clear-headed perspective that it is not very efficient for me to actually stress about things that I cannot control. And thereby, so it's maybe it seems very simple once said, right? It's really, and again, I tie back to some of the experiential learning that Kavita was talking. All the spirituality is not really about going and reading scriptures and giving gyan to others. No, I mean, it's about basically living this in your life. In some, and I'm reminded of this wonderful quote, Chakravarti Rajagopalachari, C. Rajagopalachari, in the commentary to the Bhajagovindam song sung by MS Subbulakshmi Amma. He says, basically that commentary says, knowledge that does not issue out in action is useless tinsel. And I think that's the point that I want to mention. Even spirituality, if it does not, get imbibed in your life, then it is basically you are just, inflating your ego even more and maybe talking about it. That's not helpful. Spirituality is not about going and reading scriptures and quoting shlokas, etc. It's about implementing it in your life. It should bring clarity about what is it that you can control, what is it that you cannot control, what is it that you can do. It gives you basically clarity about what are important in life and what is not important in life, and thereby enables private prioritization, and also actually tells you, when out, and this happens in every person's life, despite best efforts, sometimes outcomes will not be the way you want. And I think then being able to rationalize and say, okay, I gave it my best, I did it with 100%, a good intent. It didn't happen. That's fine. Actually, next time I will try again, rather than basically get. So in some sense, sort of a different angle that I want to give you is that if you think about, depression, etc., right? What is it? When you have to swim against the tide, it takes a lot of effort. If you swim with the tide, it actually takes less effort. So I think, and that's sort of how I want to, spirituality is also understanding what is the tide of life, and thereby sort of, aligning yourself with that. It's again, bottom line, just understanding yourself and the world that you live in, not just the world in terms of the observed world, but, even the unobserved world. That's what, and thereby I think it is just complementary to, it is incredibly complementary to your own life. So I like saying that, in some sense, if you think of it's living life king size is not about the car that you drive or the house that you have. It is about how well you react to people, how well you react to situations. It's that internal. If you are, bindas, right? That's living life king size.
Absolutely. You hit the nail, because I think you lived life in Mumbai and Delhi. And that's where the car and the house matters, and we know what it is, right? So visible. I think when it comes to spirituality, I think the most, especially for today's corporate life, especially in India, I think at least first is even giving time to think about spirituality is very important. That itself is missing in a lot of people. Even if they give 5-10 minutes of their life, I'm sure it can do wonders, probably. Yeah. You both have been very instrumental in bringing taking India to the world in a very different way, where you guys made sure that Gurudev Sri Sri Ravishankar was in DC, both in the World Bank and in IMF. How were the sessions? What was the kind of feedback you get because you bring India from a different lens, right, to the people out there. If you could share your thoughts.
I think it was around honor to be part of that.
Yeah.
Incredible honor to be part of that. But I'll let you speak about it.
Yeah, no, of course, we did it together. Let me give a little bit of background on this, right? Both of us have actually been followers of the art of living for the last more than 20 odd years. 2001, when I had come for my PhD, Kavita came in 2002. It's a few months later. Both of us basically have done the course, and while there have been periods where we've been very regular with some of the practices. There are other periods where we've not been as regular. But I think the perspective that it actually gives is something we've benefited enormously from following some of the practices that Gurudev teaches. So, I mean, look, the simple fact is that Gurudev actually, and through the art of living, has reached close to, about 500 million people across 150 countries. So, I mean, a lamp cannot basically give light to a sun. We were just basically providing an opportunity for, some of the people in the World Bank and the IMF to benefit from that sun, basically, enjoy the rays of that sun in some sense, if you will. That's what. So it was a phenomenal session. There are, Gurudev came actually and talked about mental health in particular. One of the things actually, and in that the week that we did it, that was actually the mental health week. Gurudev spoke about importance of mental health, and he said, not only is it so important for physical health, but also to live life happily. It is really, and to be able to contribute well, because if you think about World Bank, IMF, these are organizations that actually have enormous impact, across the world. Yeah. And for people who are actually looking to make an impact themselves, having the tools to actually be, not so stressed, thereby being creative, these are all really important, and Gurudev highlighted those. And I think I can tell you actually there was, so many people after the session who basically came and came to our office and thanked us for bringing Gurudev. There were close to 500 people actually that meditated together. Meditation, if I remember, I think Gurudev said that it was about 25 minutes. People didn't even feel it at all. It just felt like a 5 minutes. And that's, of course, that's his presence in some sense. I mean, incredible privilege to be able to bring someone of, and a saint of that kind actually to be able to, grace the World Bank and the IMF. For us was one of a lifetime opportunity.
And there were several people who made it happen, of course, from the Art of Living Foundation, several other colleagues of ours from both World Bank as well as IMF. And I think it was an incredible opportunity for all of us. I mean, I think it felt like a dream come true for many of us. And that's what I would leave the thought with.
In fact, before that session, Gurudev came to my office as well. He sat in the office. Many of my colleagues also got an opportunity to actually take pictures with him. Okay. So they were all very, very, they all felt incredibly thrilled as well. Having had the opportunity, there's a certain kind of unconditional, acceptance that he actually has, which makes people very comfortable in his presence.
When he starts speaking to the people, that itself is so gratifying, really amazing, right? Yeah. So indeed. I have two questions before we leave. One is, what's a out of office life for you guys on a weekend or otherwise? How do you guys spend time, DC or otherwise in India?
I think apart from, I think I'll start it out and so we can continue it further. But I think weekends currently, Santosh, begin with some errands and chores, because we are in US and you end up doing everything by yourself, which is good, which is great. So start by a lot of those things and errands, etc. But then we typically like to unwind by seeing some good movie or a show on the OTT. Now that OTT is there, it makes things so much easier. As well as maybe listen to some old movie songs. Wonderful. We both do like reading, and we spend our own time reading different things. Of course, he has his interest, I have my own interest. So we end up reading different things, but that pretty much sums up what we do in our free time. But anything I miss, Subhu, please feel free to add.
Yeah, no, also we actually go on walks, so the Potomac River is very close by here. It's and I think for me and for Kavita as well, actually, somehow we find water to be just very calming. Just being around water, actually just so going around there, actually walking there, it's a very nice. It's an experience. While we are, of course, we're talking sometimes, but we're also phases of that walk. We're also reflecting our own thoughts. It sort of calms you down. I think, it's like, I'm glad you asked this question because, all of us are like sort of, body is also like a machine. You need to recharge it, right? I think if you don't recharge it, then it basically starts very quickly, feeling very tired. And I think using that weekend to actually do things that you enjoy in a relaxed manner. And I think, and even some of the evenings on weekdays, actually, I think is really important for us to be able to recharge for the next day and sort of, I think in some sense, it also helps us to balance between basically what we need to do in, as part of our careers, as part of our work, etc., and family. And I think that's the, also we actually, both of us, and our kids too love watching cricket. If, for instance, I remember when the T20 World Cup was going on and we were watching here, the game, of course, because it was here, it was in daytime for us. So after the final, we went for a nice, celebratory meal. We went, our son was also with us at that point in time. He's studying now. So he's in Chicago. So these are things I think which enable us to sort of just rewind, sort of unwind, and thereby be able to rewind as well.
Absolutely.
I think that balance is quite important.
Absolutely. I want to end our conversation on an even elevated positive note with your book. I'm halfway through this, but when you read this book, right, you see that to be very honest with you, you see so much of hope in this country. One is about talking on a Twitter, you see so much of negativity, you wonder what's wrong with these guys, right? But when you read books like these, you see, and this is not about next 1 or 2 years. This is 2047, right? And today's generation who will be working in the plus 40s then, this is an absolutely massive piece of document to read. What's your personal view on the India story, the Viakasit Bharat, especially with reference to the 4 pillars? It's so positive, right? It really makes a huge difference. Yeah. And the good part, I must share this with you, when you start reading this book, at the right set itself, when you mention this, that you're very aggressive about the number, the 55 trillion, but you have convincingly put the point across that forget the GS and the other big fours. We are at that, and I completely agree with you, because you have seen life from 3 or 4 different lenses, from just like us, as I said, banking. Then you're looking at from an academic standpoint with ISB. Then you're looking at from a government, as an economic advisor, and now from a DC standpoint as an IMF. Right, from all 4 sides, if I put it right. What's your view?
Yeah. No, I'm glad you actually mentioned that. So those 4 perspectives. To be honest with you, actually, you made me realize it myself. Putting that. I think implicit in your question itself was is sort of one of the motivations for writing the book. As I mentioned, and when we were talking at the start of the interview, how during the 3-year period when I was there, it was basically the GDP growth was slowing down. Then COVID came, etc. And I got the opportunity to observe that there is sometimes actually an effort to try and blow up the negative. And this goes sort of stems from our conversation earlier on spiritual aspects as well. See, if we look at any human being has many positives and some negatives. And it is up to us as individuals, what do we want to focus on? I can keep saying basically, Santosh, you're looking so handsome, you're so well educated, and yet say, if I say, oh, you have a crooked nose, for instance, right? I'm not that you have one. I'm just giving as an example. Somehow the attention will possibly be on that one negative, even though there are several positives. But I think it is for us to actually focus on the positives as well. I think not just blow up the negatives. So Because I fundamentally believe that for positive outcomes to manifest, positive thinking is necessary.
Yeah.
But for negative outcomes to manifest, negative thinking is sufficient.
No.
And there are enough and more, out there who actually are providing that sufficient condition.
True.
So I actually felt that that convincingly, because I myself convinced about it, about the strengths of the Indian economy, and I've seen that from close quarters. Having that conviction, I should put out at least the necessary condition, using data, using evidence basically, and using sound conceptual arguments to argue that indeed we can. And actually, I want to give you don't want to get into the details, of the projection, etc. But I'll give you two examples just to anchor the idea.
Yeah.
Japan from 1970 to 1995 grew its GDP by 26 times in nominal dollars, 26 times. Its GDP in 1970 was about 220 billion. By 1995, it was about $5.5 trillion. China, and I give the example of China second because people will say, oh, it's not a democracy if I give that example as a, but China, 1996 to 2021, again a 25-year period, grew its GDP 22 times. It is the power of compounding that actually, that makes such huge growth happen, during a 25-year period. What I'm projecting for India is not 26 times like Japan or 22 times like China. I'm projecting only a 15, 16 times increase. And for which what we need is 8% growth. And I think I've convinced, I'm convinced myself, and that's why I've, wrote the book. For instance, that's the way I write only what I'm myself convinced about. I speak only what I'm convinced about. What we need is 8% growth, from here on till 2047. And if you look at the data, we have grown at 7% on average since 1991. And so 8% is ambitious. It's a little bit of a stretch goal, but achievable, definitely achievable, because there are lots of, sources of catch-up growth that India can have. And this is important to, to understand especially for our students. When you look at the growth of advanced economies, because the advanced economies, their firms, the economy itself is almost like, it is like the cutting edge. It's basically, so their growth needs to happen by pushing that frontier, right? Because they're at the frontier in some sense, so they have to push the frontier. But the Indian firms and the Indian economy, even for instance, in terms of how much formalized we are, our firms compared to global peers, etc., we are not at the frontier. We are actually, we still basically have to catch up, right? So, there are, whether it's actually formalization, whether it's our formal sector firms becoming as productive as the, as their global peers, advanced economy peers, whether it's credit creation, banking, for instance, and here, because you're a banker, I'll mention this statistic. If you look at the ratio of private credit to GDP, in India, it's 58% in 2020. The global average is 180%. 58% versus 180%, so much scope for growth. Take a bureaucracy, judiciary, human capital, something that, Kavita spoke about earlier about education. There are all these that we can catch up, and all these we can actually continue. I mean, I'd be very happy as an Indian, and I'm sure you'd be happy, Santosh, as well, if we catch up in the next 20 years.
Absolutely.
But, it's unlikely. We will still be playing catch up. So that's why the law of diminishing returns, which is something that manifests, because people will say, oh, the Indian economy in 1991 was a few $100 billion, and now we're, let's say, close to $4 trillion, growing at 7% from a few $100 billion to, let's say, 4 trillion, or even 7-10 trillion is fine, but beyond that will be hard. But that is why I'm actually explaining that for us, we will basically be having catch-up growth. And because we have actually a large population, we can enjoy the demographic advantage. And I think if you go back and look at countries like Japan and China, they grew during a period when the demography for them was actually favorable. By creating jobs for that population, they were able to grow. And I think last point which I want to, in terms of GDP per capita, actually, we will still be, we will not be as much as the advanced economies. If you, for instance, become a $55 trillion economy, our GDP per capita will be about $40,000, that'll be per capita. If you grow at 7%, which is the other scenarios that I also have laid out, we'll be about $30,000 GDP per capita. So in terms of GDP per capita, we will still have scope to grow even beyond 2047. That is why growth of 8% is absolutely achievable. It is ambitious, and that's why, when I was in school, one of our principals actually used to always say that, if you aim for the sky, you at least land on the roof. And I think that is important to basically to have that ambition to grow at 8%. And I genuinely believe we can actually, one of the chapters I've written is actually, analyzing what's the investment rate required, what's the productivity growth, all that by saying, and we can indeed grow at 8%. So, even though it is aggressive, it is ambitious, but it is eminently achievable. I'll just mention, a few weeks back, Mr. KV Kamath, my first boss when I graduated out of, IIM Calcutta, I used to be the head of ICS, and an icon for all Indians. He wrote a piece in the Times of India, basically, I reviewing the book and said that the goal that I've laid out is eminently achievable. And I think that felt very encouraging to hear from someone like him, actually, who thinks that this goal is achievable. So bottom line, I think it's important. We need to have the can-do spirit, and I think part of the objective of writing that book is to actually imbibe that can-do spirit, among all of us Indians.
Absolutely. On that absolutely fantastic positive note, thank you so much, Professor Subramanian and Kavita, for being on my podcast, The Sound of Money. And I hope you listeners, you love the show. Amazing catching up with two power couple, a power couple from in DC now. One, leading the IMF, and of course the other one in World Bank. And I'm sure making India very, very proud. Thank you so much for being on this podcast.
Thank you. It was our pleasure to be on your show. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Santosh.
Thank you.
Really enjoyed the conversation.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. Yeah.